Are you moving abroad and you've been living and working in the US? If the answer is yes, you're probably asking yourself, what happens to my 401k? What happens to my IRA? What happens to all of my US retirement accounts? So when you leave the US, your accounts don't just vanish, but what you do with them has a massive impact on your financial future. Generally speaking, what you may have in the US are accounts such as a 401k, a 403b, a 457b, or an IRA. And when you leave the US, they remain in the US, okay, so they're under IRS rules, but the challenge lies with how do you access funds, how do you manage these, and how do you make them grow as a non-US resident. So generally speaking, once you leave the US, you have 4 different paths you can go down. The first path would just be leaving everything where it is. Now this can present its own challenges because some custodians may restrict you to having the account open, depending on the country where you're going. So if this is the option you want to go down, you want to make sure you plan well ahead of time. So contact the custodian and make sure that they actually will allow you to keep this account open. Because if you move to that country and you update the address and they then turn around and say you need to transfer your account, you've got 90 days to do so, you're then scrambling around to make sure you can find a solution. So plan that one ahead of time. Let's just say they allow you to keep the account open. What you may have are restrictions on the types of investments you can buy. So as an American or a US connected individual, what you can't do is buy a non-US ETF or fund, which is the reason why you can't buy it in your retirement accounts. But then if you move to, for example, Europe, they have restrictions on buying US ETFs and funds. And this also would include restrictions directly within your US retirement accounts. So we have a big list. Every country has different rules, but you need to make sure that you're abiding by the rules in that country, and all of the different institutions in the US will make sure they do adhere to these rules. So more often than not, if you are moving to Europe, for example, there are going to be some sort of investment restrictions, and it may leave you with the only option of buying direct stocks and direct bonds. So if you do have an account such as a 401k, which don't give you the ability to buy direct stocks and direct bonds, then you may have to roll this over, which comes to the option number 2, which is rolling over all of your accounts into an IRA. There's a difference between rolling them into a traditional or a Roth IRA, so please be aware of that. And for example, Roth IRAs can be treated differently, but if you do have multiple accounts, the best thing for you is just to make sure that you can keep everything consolidated in one place to avoid having to work out what restrictions on all of the accounts are. The third option would be cashing in your accounts completely. And although this may sound like a good option at first, you have to think that you're going to be paying income tax on the whole amount. There could be early withdrawal penalties as well of 10%. And then what are you going to do with those funds? Because as an American, you are going to be restricted to being able to set up any sort of accounts based on FATCA. So you now paid a hefty tax bill, and you may not be able to find the solution you want. The fourth option, most people think, right, well, I'm now living overseas, why can't I just move my US retirement accounts offshore? Well, unfortunately, that's not an option. So you can't just, for example, move to a country and roll over or transfer your accounts into a local scheme because the rules are completely different. So you will have to keep your accounts where they are, and you want to make sure that not only you look at the options that are available, but how are these accounts going to be taxed. And every different country is going to have a different tax treaty, and each different type of account can be treated differently. So a 401k, a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, even brokerage accounts, all of these could be taxed differently to how they would be taxed in the US. The US, of course, is still going to tax at their end, but they could, depending on what the tax treaty says, will depend on how much tax you end up paying. Certain countries have very favourable treaties, other ones don't, and this can play a big role in where you end up moving. Us as a company, we have experience all around the world. We have done for many years. So if you are thinking of moving to, for example, 1 or 2, or maybe you want to look at 3 or 4 different countries, and you like each place, but you're unsure how the tax in each place works, we can give you a general overview just to see if maybe, for example, your decision's swayed based on, for example, different tax rates on the accounts that you actually have. So those are some things that you want to be thinking about if you are leaving the US. It can be a bit more complicated depending on where you go, but if you are looking for more information, please reach out to us and we can try and guide you in the right direction.